Hi everybody, good morning. It's me, Olivia Tison, here to present you with today my unit. And the title of my unit is How Do I Introduce Myself in Different Contexts? And this was adapted from a textbook called Entre Culturas Uno. It's a very good textbook, lended to me by Kate Eggers-Leith. Thank you, Kate. And this was the Unidad Preliminar that I redesigned. So let me walk you through my future context. So as many of you know, right now I work in a Spanish immersion school in the special education department, but I'm thinking in the future. So in the future, I'm hoping to have Spanish 1 for 8th graders. So this unit was designed for my future L2 self with novice low learners in mind. Some may have had prior Spanish experience, depending on what schools they're coming from, different schools they may have come from, but they're still in my Spanish 1 class. Some may be heritage learners, and it would be a diverse student body because I would be teaching this 8th grade course in Minneapolis. Let's move along to the redesign. So the unit for the textbooks unit was Unidad Preliminar, and I just updated my theme to introductions. These were the essential questions, and there were 3 of them, for the textbooks unit. How widely used is Spanish in the world? How do I begin a conversation in Spanish? What strategies will help me communicate in Spanish? I used a lot of these questions and just adapted them more to fit my goals for the unit. So my essential question is, how do I introduce myself in different contexts? And then the guiding questions here are, where do people speak Spanish? How do I begin and end a conversation when meeting a Spanish speaker, depending on age and setting? And what do people say and do when exchanging information in Spanish? Thank you to my classmates and to my pragmatics course prior and to this course for helping me make a unit that I believe is stronger and more authentic for this intro level Spanish course. So let's talk about ACTFL standards now. So I tried to incorporate all 5, and I'm just going to give you a little bit of an update of what that looks like in my unit. Okay, so as for communication, in this unit, students will be conversing a lot, introducing themselves, learning how to ask ¿Cómo estás?, learning how to say where they're from, learning how, I'm imagining that a lot of you have taught units like this before. For me, it's my first time. So asking where they're from, also birthdays, dates. So they'll be conversing with each other throughout this. They'll also be writing in a graphic organizer and a few learning activities. They'll be watching videos and filling in graphic organizers from there. And they will be presenting in front of the class in pairs during one of the learning activities on Spanish-speaking presidents. Moving on to cultures. So students will begin to demonstrate an understanding of the relationship between the perspectives and practices of the culture studied. In this case, we will be watching videos of Spanish speakers introducing themselves to each other. We will be talking about tú versus usted because it's an intro course. I will maybe briefly mention vos, but will largely speak to tú versus usted for this unit. And that being said, they will be also reflecting, and I'm just going to jump down here to comparisons because these 2 are kind of going to go hand in hand for us, that they will, students will demonstrate understanding of the nature of language through comparisons of Spanish and English. So as we talk about cultures, we'll also be talking about how do we introduce ourselves in English, and how do we ourselves introduce ourselves in different contexts. So how do we introduce ourselves to somebody on the bus versus how do we introduce ourselves to our friend's grandma, for example. So those 2 will kind of play hand in hand. There's a Venn diagram they'll be filling out. And there will also be, I'm going to move right up here to connections. So for this unit, there is a comic strip that students will be making for one of their learning activities where they will be getting Spanish-speaking magazines, and they'll cut out images of people that they like they'll make a comic strip of them introducing them to each other, and they'll also write what the context is and whether or not to use tu versus usted and what pragmatics are used, which also goes along with culture. So whether or not they say things like que bueno or excelente, padre, genial, they'll need to include at least two pragmatic elements into this connections design of the comic strip. And finally, we have communities, which is Axful's standard. And I was thinking for this that this actually ties really well with the IPA that you'll see in just a moment, because the presentational task for this unit is that students introduce themselves at our school's Hispanic Heritage Festival in the library. So they're kind of incorporating themselves into the community in that way. So let's move along to the objectives. So the objectives of this unit come down to three major umbrellas. There is identifying and express, and I'll briefly touch on some of the vocabulary terms that they'll be learning, which is countries, states, and territories, numbers 1 through 31, months, days of the week, and identifying key vocabulary when it comes to full names, origins, birthdays, and starting to make inferences. They will also identify the pronunciation of letters. Let's move to the second one. Introduce. So they'll be learning greetings and goodbyes. They'll be learning the verbs llamarse, estar, and ser, and the yo, tu, and usted forms of those. Same thing with the pronouns. They'll be learning and identifying me, tu, and su. And the question words como, cuando, and de donde. Lastly, we have the compare portion of the objective, which is they'll be comparing how to introduce themselves to someone older and much younger than themselves and use pragmatics. So they'll be able to use correct expressions, they'll be able to use tu versus usted, and they'll be able to use pragmatic words such as mucho gusto, such as excelente, some of the words I touched on earlier. So this all fits into my unit's essential question and theme of introductions and how do I introduce myself in different contexts. I'm about to show you the old IPA. So this was the old IPA, and in this old IPA, students were told they were going to go to Spain for the summer, and they needed to choose which school they were going to go to. They come across this online ad you'll see here in the right corner, Cursos Intensivos Verano, and they are to read this ad. They were to understand Spanish speakers as they introduce themselves, and they were to answer a few questions about themselves to their new teacher. So one thing that I didn't like so much about this IPA, though it has a lot of good components, is that in my experience teaching in Minneapolis, a lot of my students couldn't visualize themselves going to a different country for the summer and just taking online Spanish courses. So I wanted to redesign it and make it more authentic to my future students. So here's what it looked like. So that was the old prompt. The new prompt is you are going to be representing a famous Spanish speaker at our school's Hispanic Heritage Festival. The interpretive task of the old task was to read an online ad and to also listen to some Spanish speakers introduce themselves, pick out key information. The new interpretive task is to choose 2 famous Spanish speakers and fill out graphic organizers based on their mini bios. List a curiosity, and locate where those people are from on the map. The interpersonal one from the old unit, from the textbook, was that the teacher wants to get to know them, and then they'll have a turn introducing themselves to the teacher. One thing to note on that old task was that it was a recording, so there was no pragmatics used, which I thought was a weakness of this old IPA. So the new IPA, the students who now are a famous person, kind of a role play situation, will be introducing themselves as that representative to their classmates, and the main interpersonal one will be introducing themselves to the coordinator, which is me. I'll show you what that looks like in just a second. There wasn't a presentational task of the old one, and the new one is, of course, to introduce themselves at the Hispanic Heritage Festival. So this is what they'll see when they get their IPA. They'll see, okay, we are going to be presenting ourselves at this Hispanic Heritage Festival on Friday, September 25th. Each class will be in the school library during that time, and they'll know that groups of 6th graders will be coming up to them as they present themselves in Spanish. Okay, so let's talk about the interpretive task of this IPA. Students are going to get this list, and whether or not this will be in 2021, so hopefully we're not still virtual, but who knows. Students can look at this online, or this is a practical element, or they will receive this paper and pencil. So they'll get this list of pictures, and they'll choose 2 that they want to read their mini biographical blurbs. So here are those blurbs. This is authentic because it was screenshotted from Spanish Wikipedia. And so let's say they chose these 2. Okay, these are the 2 votes. Students can vote on which person they want to represent. Okay, they choose these 2. So they are going to fill out this graphic organizer with the complete name, origin, age, and the month. And then for exceeds, they can write something they're curious about. They need to tell me tu versus usted. Here's a map where they need to circle on the map where they are from. And here's the rubric. This meets the identify and express. Secondly, interpersonal. They will be walking around the classroom with the scavenger hunt model here and be introducing themselves and writing down different representatives' names. They will also meet with me, the Spanish coordinator. Okay, here's the rubric and the checklist. This meets the introduce and the compare because they need to use tu versus usted. They need to use pragmatics. Thirdly, the presentational. At the Hispanic Heritage Festival, they will have Google Slides or a poster to go along with it. Checklist. This meets the introduce themselves. Thank you so much. Thanks for all of your help. Any questions?